I gave my apprentice 20% of my company, and the next morning she locked me out of my own workshop. But she didn't know I'd built a trap into the $3 million watch she was about to unveil to the world. The brass key that had opened my workshop door every morning for 40 years didn't fit anymore. I stood there on the damp cobblestones at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, staring at the lock on the heavy oak door of Vance Co., and felt my entire world tilt sickeningly sideways. The familiar, ornate, brass faceplate I'd polished with my own hands 10,000 times was gone. In its place was a gleaming, modern, high-security cylinder, cold, metallic, brutally unfamiliar. My hands renowned worldwide for a steadiness that could place a screw the size of a dust mote onto a watch balance staff, began to tremble. Taped to the wood below this alien lock was a crisp white envelope. Arthur Vance, printed on the front in an impersonal font that felt like a slap. I tore it open, my fingers suddenly clumsy. The letter was from a law firm I'd never heard of, a name with too many partners, and an address on a street of glass and steel. The language was dense legalese, but the meaning was clear as a shard of glass cutting into my throat. I'd been terminated from my own company. My 80% ownership stake absorbed by my 20% partner. Barred from the premises. Any attempt to enter would be treated as criminal trespass. An emergency partners meeting had been held. A majority vote had passed. My position as senior partner was revoked, effective immediately. How could there be a majority vote without me? I was the majority, 80%. And then, like the slow, sickening click of a complex mechanism falling into a catastrophic place, I understood. The loophole in the partnership agreement I'd signed just 7 days ago. The boilerplate clause my lawyer had assured me was just standard language for situations where a partner was incapacitated or unreachable. She'd called an emergency meeting that I was never informed of. She, as the only partner present at her own sham meeting, had constituted a quorum of 1. She, with her 20%, had cast the majority vote because my 80% was, by definition, absent. It was a betrayal of such breathtaking, elegant, sociopathic brilliance that it almost defied comprehension. Lena Petrova, my apprentice, my protégée, the young woman I'd rescued from nothing and taught everything, had just stolen my life's work using the law itself as her weapon. And standing there on that quiet cobblestone street, the useless brass key still clutched in my right hand, the death sentence of my 40-year career shaking in my left, I realized something that would change everything. She'd made one fatal mistake. She thought the battle was about lawyers and contracts and money. She was about to learn that the real war would be fought on a battlefield she could never master. The secret, hidden, and treacherous heart of a watch. To understand the depth of her betrayal, you need to understand what Vance Co. meant to me, not just as a business, but as the culmination of everything I'd ever believed in, ever worked for, ever loved. For 40 years, my workshop had been my sanctuary. My monastery, my cathedral of precision, a small, quiet island of patience and craft, tucked away on a cobblestone street in a city that had grown increasingly loud and chaotic around it. The building itself was a 3-story brownstone from 1887, with the workshop occupying the ground floor. The front door was heavy dark oak, scarred with age but solid, with a brass nameplate that had oxidized to a beautiful patina green. Vance Co., Master Horologists, Est, 1985. Inside, the space was a perfect marriage of old-world craftsmanship and modern necessity. The walls were exposed brick, The ceiling crossed with original wooden beams. The floor was wide plank oak that had absorbed 40 years of footsteps, the occasional dropped tool, and countless hours of standing in the same spot while working on a particularly challenging piece. The main workbench, my workbench, ran along the north wall, positioned to catch the soft, even light that came through the tall windows. I'd built it myself from a single piece of reclaimed oak that had come from a demolished church in Vermont. It was 8 feet long, 3 feet wide, and its surface was a topographical map of my career. Burn marks from soldering irons, ink stains from technical drawings, tiny divots where screwdrivers had slipped, the ghost impressions of 10,000 watches that had rested there. The air in the workshop had its own unique scent, a layered perfume that I'd breathed for so long it had become part of my DNA. There was the sharp, clean smell of watchmaker's oil, not the cheap stuff, but the Swiss-made synthetic oil that cost $300 for a bottle the size of your thumb. The warm, almost sweet scent of aged brass and bronze. The leather smell from the dozens of watch straps hanging on hooks. The faint mineral odor of ruby jewel bearings. And underneath it all, the smell of old wood, soaked in decades of careful work. The walls were lined with custom-built cabinets containing thousands of tiny drawers, each one labeled in my careful handwriting. Balance wheels, 18th C, escapement parts, Patek Philippe, screws, various periods. Some drawers contained components so small they were almost invisible, screws that weighed less than a human eyelash. Springs coiled so tightly they looked like specks of dust. Above the workbench hung my tools, not hanging randomly, but arranged with the precision of a surgical theater. Tweezers of every conceivable size and shape, their tips worn to perfect points through decades of use. Screwdrivers with handles made of rosewood, their blades ground to fit specific screw slots. Loops ranging from 2.5x magnification to a powerful 10x that could reveal the individual machining marks on a gear tooth. A collection of antique watchmakers' lathes, some dating back to the 1800s, each one capable of work no modern CNC machine could replicate. This wasn't just a workshop. It was a living museum, a repository of knowledge that couldn't be found in books or downloaded from the internet. It was 40 years of accumulated wisdom, of mistakes made and lessons learned, of relationships with clients who'd trusted me with their most precious possessions. I am Arthur Vance, a master horologist. Not just a watchmaker. There's a profound distinction that matters in our world, though few outside it understand. Anyone can replace a battery or swap a strap. That's watch repair, and it's a perfectly respectable trade. But horology, true horology, is something different entirely. It's art, science, history, and obsession combined into a discipline so demanding that only a handful of people in each generation truly master it. A horologist doesn't just fix watches. We resurrect them. We take rusted, water-damaged, long-forgotten masterpieces, watches that were once the pride of kings and captains of industry, and we make their tiny, intricate hearts beat again. I'd worked on pieces that most people only ever see in museums behind bulletproof glass. A Breguet Tourbillon from 1805, its original owner guillotined during the French Revolution, the watch somehow surviving 2 centuries of history. A Patek Philippe perpetual calendar from 1925 that had been at the bottom of a lake for 30 years, its owner having crashed his seaplane during Prohibition while smuggling Canadian whiskey. A Vacheron Constantin Grand Complication that had belonged to a Maharaja, its case encrusted with diamonds, its movement so complex it contained 867 individual parts. Each restoration was a journey that could take months or even years. You couldn't rush horology any more than you could rush aging wine or growing an oak tree. The work demanded a level of patience that modern society had forgotten how to teach. My life had been governed by a profound and simple principle that I had learned from my own mentor, Henri Dubois. The heart of a true masterpiece watch is not the coiled energy of the mainspring or the intricate dance of the gear train. It's the silence, the perfect, calibrated, utterly reliable pause between each tick. That sacred, infinitesimal moment of stillness is what gives the tick its meaning, its rhythm, its soul. Henri had taught me that at his workshop in Geneva 43 years ago, when I was 22 and thought I knew everything. He'd been 80 then, his hands gnarled with arthritis, but still capable of work that would make younger men weep with envy. "Listen," he'd said, holding a completed watch to my ear. "Not to the tick. Listen to the silence between. That is where the watchmaker lives. In that space of perfect nothing, you hear whether your work is true." I'd spent a lifetime learning to hear that silence, to calibrate it, to make it perfect. And for 7 years, I'd been teaching someone else to hear it too. Lena Petrova. The name still tasted like ashes in my mouth. She'd walked into my workshop on a rainy March afternoon, 7 years ago, and I can still remember every detail of that moment with painful clarity. I'd been working on a particularly challenging restoration, an 1820 Breguet pocket watch with a damaged cylinder escapement. When the bell above the door chimed, I looked up, annoyed at the interruption. Wednesday afternoons were my deep work time, and I didn't take walk-ins. Standing in the doorway, dripping rainwater onto my oak floor, was a young woman who looked like she'd been through hell. She was 19, though she could have passed for younger, thin to the point of gaunt, with sharp cheekbones and hollow eyes that had seen too much too soon. Her clothes were worn but clean, jeans that had been repaired multiple times, a jacket that was 2 sizes too large. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her hands, I noticed immediately, were rough, the nails bitten down to nothing. But it was her eyes that stopped me from asking her to leave. They were dark brown, almost black, and they held a desperate, feral intelligence that reminded me of a starving wolf, dangerous, yes, but also capable of remarkable things if given the chance. "I need to learn," she said in accented English, her voice barely above a whisper. "Russian," I thought, "or maybe Ukrainian. I have nothing to pay you, but I will work for free. I will clean, I will organize, I will do anything. Please, just teach me." I should have said no. I'd turned away dozens of would-be apprentices over the years, mostly trust fund kids who thought watchmaking would be a cool hobby, or engineering students who wanted to add traditional craftsmanship to their resumes before moving on to Silicon Valley. But something about her stopped me. "Why watches?" I asked. She stepped into the workshop, her eyes scanning the walls of tools, the cabinets of parts, the workbench where the Breguet lay in pieces, like a mechanical autopsy. "Because they are honest," she said, and I saw tears forming in her eyes, though her voice remained steady. "They tell truth. If you make mistake, they stop. If you do good work, they live forever. Everything else in world is lies and chaos. But watch is perfect, or is broken. There is no in-between." I later learned she was a refugee from a war I didn't fully understand, from a country that had been torn apart by violence she wouldn't discuss. She'd lost family. Exactly who and how many, she never said. She'd spent 2 years in camps, another year working minimum wage jobs, sending money back to relatives who'd managed to escape to other countries. She discovered watches by accident. She told me months later, when we'd built enough trust for her to share pieces of her story. In a refugee camp, someone had given her a broken mechanical watch as payment for English lessons. She'd taken it apart with a borrowed screwdriver and a pair of pliers, trying to understand how it worked. And something had clicked in her mind, the mechanical logic of it, the cause and effect, the way each tiny component had a specific purpose, a specific place, in a world that had become incomprehensible chaos. Here was something that made perfect, beautiful sense. I gave her a test that first day. I handed her a pair of tweezers and asked her to pick up a screw so small it was barely visible to the naked eye, then place it into a hole the width of a human hair. Her hands didn't shake, not even slightly. She completed the task on the first try. "When can I start?" she asked. I hired her on the spot. For the first 6 months, she did exactly what she'd promised. Cleaned, organized, ran errands, made coffee. But every spare moment, she watched. She stood behind me at the workbench for hours, silent and motionless, observing every movement of my hands, absorbing every word I muttered to myself as I worked through problems. She asked questions that revealed an instinctive understanding of mechanical principles that usually took years to develop. Why does the escapement wheel have that specific tooth profile? What would happen if you changed the ratio of the gear train? How do you account for thermal expansion in the hairspring? After 6 months, I let her disassemble her first watch, a simple 19th century pocket watch with a basic movement. Most apprentices took 2 hours and inevitably lost at least one screw or bent something. She completed it in 45 minutes, didn't lose a single component, and when she reassembled it, the watch ran within 5 seconds per day of perfect timekeeping. I'd never seen anything like it. She didn't just learn, she absorbed. The complex mathematics of escapement theory that took most students months to grasp, she understood in weeks. The delicate art of hand-polishing a balance wheel to within 1,000th of a millimeter tolerance, a skill that took years to master, she achieved in months. I watched her spend 14 hours straight on her first major restoration, a complicated perpetual calendar that had defeated more experienced watchmakers. She refused to eat, barely drank water, her eyes never leaving the loop, her hands moving with the precision of a surgical robot. When she finally finished at 3 a.m., the watch was perfect, absolutely perfect. She wept when it started ticking. The first time I'd seen her show that kind of raw emotion. "It lives," she whispered, holding it like a newborn. I made it live again. Over the years, she became not just my apprentice, but my companion in the work. We developed a rhythm, a silent language. I could hand her a tool without speaking, and she'd know exactly what I needed. We could diagnose problems together with just a glance at a movement, seeing the same patterns, the same solutions. She understood what I'd been trying to find for 40 years. Someone who didn't see watchmaking as a job or even a career, but as a calling, a sacred trust to preserve something precious and irreplaceable. She worked 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. Never complaining, she lived in a tiny studio apartment above a Chinese restaurant, sent most of her modest salary to relatives, lived on instant noodles and strong tea. The workshop was her true home, and watches were her only real passion. I saw in her not just a student, but a true successor. Someone who understood that this wasn't about making money or running a business. It was about keeping alive an art form that was dying in the digital age, drowned out by mass-produced quartz watches and smartwatches that treated time as just another app. In the quiet, focused stillness of her work, in the way her hands moved with the same reverence I felt when handling a masterpiece, I saw the future of everything I'd built. She became like a daughter to me. Not that we ever discussed it in those terms. We weren't a demonstrative family. We expressed love through shared work, through the mutual respect of 2 minds operating on the same wavelength, through the simple act of working side by side in comfortable silence. My wife had died 6 years before Lena arrived, taken by cancer that we'd fought for 3 years before she'd finally surrendered. We'd never had children. The work had always been enough. The watches our children, each restoration a birth we'd celebrated together. After my wife's death, the workshop had become even more central to my existence. It was where I could lose myself, where grief couldn't touch me, because the work demanded absolute presence, absolute focus. You can't think about loss when you're trying to fit a balance spring that weighs less than a snowflake into position without breathing too hard and blowing it away. Lena understood that instinctively. She never tried to be a replacement for my wife, never overstepped, but her presence filled the empty spaces in the workshop, gave me a reason to keep teaching, to keep pushing, to keep believing that the art form I loved wouldn't die with my generation. So when my 65th birthday arrived last week, making her my partner felt not just right but inevitable. It was the natural progression of everything we'd built together. So last week, on the morning of my 65th birthday, I'd made her my partner. We sat in my small, cluttered office, the partnership agreement spread out on the worn leather of my desk. It was a thick sheaf of heavy parchment, the kind of document that felt permanent, important, sacred. With a single stroke of my antique fountain pen, a Mont Blanc Meisterstück that had been my father's, I gifted her 20% of the business I'd spent a lifetime building from nothing. It was more than a partnership. It was an anointment, a passing of the torch. I gave her a new key to the workshop, full, unrestricted access to our business accounts, our invaluable client list, our archive of restoration documentation. And most importantly, I gave her my absolute, unconditional, paternal trust. She'd wept as she signed her name next to mine, her tears staining the heavy paper. "I will not let you down, Arthur," she'd whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I swear it. You've given me everything. I will protect this legacy with my life." It was, without question, the proudest moment of my life. 24 hours later, she'd destroyed it. The phone call I made to her that morning, standing on the street outside my own locked workshop, was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But I had to hear it from her, had to hear the lie from her own lips. I needed to understand the why. This wasn't just a business partner. This was someone I'd loved like a daughter, someone I'd rescued from poverty and given a future. She answered on the second ring, her voice cool and professional. "Vance Co," she said, and hearing my company's name in her mouth felt like a knife between my ribs. "Lena Petrova speaking." "Lena." My voice came out hoarse, unfamiliar. "It's Arthur. What have you done?" A perfectly calibrated pause. Not surprise or confusion. The silence of a chess master, considering her opponent's final, futile move. "I've secured the future of the business, Arthur," she said, her tone as emotionless as if she were discussing a spreadsheet. "You've become sentimental, resistant to innovation. The business was stagnating under the weight of your nostalgia. I did what was necessary to protect the legacy." "The legacy?" I choked out, a raw, incredulous laugh catching in my throat. "I am the legacy. I built it with my own 2 hands. I taught you everything you know. You taught me the craft, Arthur, for which I'll always be grateful." Her voice remained unnervingly serene. "But you never understood the business. This is a new world. Branding, online presence, marketing, scaling. Not a single old man hiding in a dusty workshop, tinkering with antiques for a handful of wealthy clients. I'm taking Vance Co global. You should have accepted my generous offer of partnership as the comfortable retirement package it was intended to be." Then she hung up. The dial tone that followed was the most final, most desolate sound I'd ever heard. The weeks that followed were a descent into hell. The legal battle was exactly what I'd feared, a war of attrition I was hopelessly unprepared to fight. Lena, using the substantial funds in the Vance Co business accounts, my money, accumulated over 40 years, hired a team of ruthless corporate litigators. They weren't lawyers. They were a machine designed to destroy me. They buried my semi-retired lawyer George and me in a blizzard of motions, discovery requests, procedural delays, jurisdictional challenges. Every small step forward was met with a wall of legal maneuvering designed for one purpose: drain my savings and break my will to live. But the legal assault was only one front. The other was more painful: a systematic campaign of character assassination. She contacted our clients, the deeply private network of wealthy collectors, auction houses, and museums I'd spent a lifetime cultivating. Her story, as it was relayed back to me by the few who remained loyal, was a masterpiece of manipulation. She told them I'd been suffering a tragic decline into senility. She invented stories of my shaking hands, a particularly cruel lie in our profession. She fabricated tales of missed deadlines and misplaced components. She twisted my quiet, focused nature into evidence of increasingly paranoid behavior. She framed her coup not as betrayal, but as a painful but necessary act of preservation. She'd been forced to take control to protect the venerable Vance Co legacy from its aging, declining founder. And the world believed her. Some of my oldest clients stopped returning my calls. I heard the whispers. Real shame about Arthur. Lost his touch. Thank God that brilliant young woman saved the place. She wasn't just stealing my business. She was erasing my history, rewriting my entire life story with herself as the hero and me as the doddering fool who needed to be put out to pasture. 3 months into the legal battle, my savings were gone. My house, the small brownstone I'd shared with my late wife, where I'd built my first workshop in the basement, was all I had left. I couldn't afford the mortgage payments or legal fees. I was forced to sell it. Packing 40 years of memories into brown cardboard boxes was an act of soul-crushing despair. My wife's books, my horological library, first editions dating back to the 18th century. Tools that had belonged to my mentor, all of it boxed up, labeled and carted away to storage I could barely afford. I moved into a small, sterile rented apartment on the grim outskirts of the city. It smelled of cheap paint and quiet desperation. My window looked out onto the brick wall of the building next door. I hit bottom. The kind of bottom where you start wondering if it's worth going on. The silence in that apartment wasn't the productive silence of my workshop. It was the dead, empty silence of a tomb. One bleak afternoon, I was scrolling through Horological Times, the industry's most prestigious journal. It was masochistic, a way to torture myself with glimpses of the world I'd been exiled from. Then I saw it, the cover story, the new face of time, how Lena Petrova is revitalizing a classic brand and forging a new legacy. The article was a hagiography, a breathless tribute to her vision, her genius, her bold, innovative direction for the venerable Vance Co. The accompanying photograph made my vision go red. She was at my workbench, the one I'd built with my own hands from reclaimed oak. Its surface a map of 40 years of scars and stains. The soft northern light I knew intimately illuminated her face in a mask of serene, intense, utterly fraudulent concentration. And in her hands, held with proprietary confidence that made my blood boil, was the St. Clair Mariner. Not just any watch, the watch, a legendary one-of-a-kind piece from the 19th century. A masterpiece so complex that most modern horologists considered it a myth. It had been given to me on long-term loan for restoration by its reclusive, anonymous owner, a sacred trust granted to me personally, not to Vance Co. My own mentor, the great Henri Dubois, had been the last person to work on it 50 years ago, and now she was holding it, touching it, claiming it as her own. Something inside me that had been drowning in grief suddenly broke the surface and breathed fire. The sorrow, the helplessness, the resignation, it all vaporized in a white-hot flash of pure, cold, exquisitely precise rage. I looked at that photograph, at her smug face, at the sacrilegious way she held that watch, and I realized something crucial. Her greatest strength, her boundless ambition, her technical skill, her desperate need to be seen as a visionary, was also her most exploitable weakness. She didn't just want money, she wanted legacy. She wanted her name whispered with the great masters. She wanted to be a legend. Fine, I would help her. I would help her build a legacy so spectacular, so infamous, so utterly catastrophic that it would be told in cautionary whispers for 100 years. She thought the battle was about lawyers and money. She was about to learn that the real war would be fought on a battlefield she could never master. The secret, hidden, treacherous heart of a watch. My apartment transformed into a different kind of workshop, a laboratory for revenge. The legal battle was a lost cause designed to bleed me dry. With strange liberation, I called George and told him to stand down. Let the motions lie unanswered. Cease all action. My new strategy wouldn't be fought in courtrooms. It would be fought in the obscure, fiercely passionate, deeply secretive online world of elite horology. Years ago, for my own amusement, and to engage in technical debates without my reputation's weight, I'd created an anonymous online persona, a Vacheron, a subtle nod to one of the great masters. Vacheron was a reclusive, almost mythical old-school horologist from the Swiss valleys who occasionally posted on invitation-only forums where the world's top watchmakers debated escapement theory and tourbillon design in language almost no one else could understand. I logged back into the account for the first time in a decade. I spent a week re-establishing Vacheron's credibility. I lurked, read, then began posting dense, esoteric analyses of famous complex movements. I solved intractable restoration problems that had stumped respected members. I dropped subtle hints of a lifetime spent working on priceless pieces for anonymous, wealthy clients. I carefully built a narrative of a reclusive genius who'd forgotten more about horology than most would ever know. Then I laid the bait. I started a new thread. Thoughts on the St. Clair Mariner. I knew Lena would be monitoring these forums obsessively, searching for any information about the masterpiece she now possessed. I praised the watch's known complications, its historical significance. I acknowledged that Henri Dubois had been the last to work on it. Then I dropped the poison. But what so few modern restorers seem to understand is that St. Clair was not just a watchmaker. He was a trickster, a puzzle maker. The mariner's true genius is not in what you can see, but in what you cannot. There is a ghost in that machine, a fatal flaw, a beautiful, deliberate trap, engineered into the very heart of the movement that will turn the entire gear train to dust if the restorer doesn't know the secret. The post exploded in the forums, debated furiously, dismissed by some as ramblings of an old man, but it planted a seed of doubt, of mystery, of fear. I followed up with more cryptic posts about the mariner's unique, problematic date change mechanism, a problem I knew she'd be struggling with. Less than a week later, I received a private encrypted message from LP Horology. She introduced herself as the new head of Vance Co, current custodian of the St. Clair Mariner. She'd encountered a minor but intriguing anomaly that had resisted conventional solutions. She'd been fascinated by Vacheron's posts. Would the reclusive master be willing to offer consultation under conditions of absolute secrecy? The fish was on the hook. Over the next 2 months, I played a long, intricate, deeply satisfying game. As the crotchety but brilliant A. Vacheron, I became her secret, invisible mentor. I toyed with her for a week before agreeing. I made her beg. Then I demanded an exorbitant consulting fee wired in untraceable cryptocurrency, a small, ironic reclamation of my stolen money. I also demanded one condition: When the watch was unveiled, she would publicly acknowledge the invaluable contribution of the mysterious A. Vacheron. She agreed to everything, her ambition and terror of failing overriding all other considerations. I began feeding her information in carefully controlled doses, a masterful concoction of genuine brilliance and subtle, catastrophic misinformation. The secret of the St. Clair Mariner was real. Henri Dubois had told me years ago, sacred oral history passed from master to apprentice. St. Clair had built a ghost complication into the watch's movement, a hidden secondary mainspring in a secret compartment beneath the main plate. Its purpose was a chronometric failsafe, a backup power reserve that would engage if the primary spring failed. But it had a fatal flaw, a deliberate trap. If the primary mainspring was ever serviced without first disengaging this hidden mechanism in a very specific 27-step counterintuitive sequence, the sudden uncontrolled release of the secondary spring's tension would cause a shockwave, a catastrophic chain reaction that would shatter the delicate ruby-set teeth of the main gear train like glass. It was a booby trap, a test for future generations. Only a true master would ever understand the heart of his creation. My guidance to Lena was a masterpiece of deception. I acknowledged the anomaly she'd found. I guided her through a complex, impressive-sounding, but ultimately fatally incorrect series of steps to bypass it. My solution would make the watch appear to function perfectly. It would solve the date change problem, but it would not disengage the ghost complication. Instead, my instructions built a fragile bridge of gears, a temporary fix that would hold the bowspring's tension in precarious balance. A bridge designed to hold, to function, to tick, until one specific, predictable, irresistible circumstance. I wasn't teaching her restoration. I was teaching her how to build a bomb. Her grand plan was to unveil the fully restored St. Clair Mariner at the annual Geneva Watch Fair, the most prestigious horological event in the world. The centerpiece of a presentation that would cement her reputation as the new queen of watchmaking, the perfect stage for her coronation and her execution. The day of the Geneva Watch Fair was a crisp, bright alpine afternoon. I flew to Switzerland in business class, using the last of my savings and a healthy portion of Lena's consulting fee. I'd created a new identity for the occasion. I was no longer broken Arthur Vance. I was A. Vacheron, the myth made flesh, attending at Lena Petrova's personal invitation. I wore a tailored tweed suit, elegant gold-rimmed spectacles, and a well-trimmed gray beard I'd spent 2 months growing. I sat in the front row of the packed auditorium, a ghost at my own apprentice's coming-out party. My heart was a slow, steady, perfectly regulated movement in my chest. Lena took the stage to thunderous applause. She was radiant in a sharp black dress, confident, eloquent. She spoke about tradition, innovation, the sacred honor of being history's custodian. Then, with theatrical flourish, she gestured to a velvet pedestal. A technician removed a glass dome. There it was. The St. Clair Mariner sat under a spotlight, its polished gold case gleaming, its intricate multi-layered face a breathtaking marvel. And it was ticking. She'd done it. It was alive. A murmur of awe swept through the crowd. She demonstrated its complications on a massive HD screen, showing a live magnified feed of the internal movement, the perpetual calendar. The minute repeater chiming with bell-like clarity, the retrograde date, the moon phase, everything functioned perfectly, flawlessly. The audience of the world's most important collectors and industry titans was utterly captivated. She was on the absolute pinnacle of her triumph. Then she made her final, fatal mistake. "I must give special acknowledgement," she said, her voice ringing with generous triumph, "to a reclusive master whose guidance was invaluable in solving this magnificent piece's deepest riddles. His name is A. Vacheron, and I believe he's here today." "Mr. Vacheron, would you please stand?" I stood slowly, deliberately. A ripple of whispers and appreciative applause. I was a legend, a myth, and here I was in flesh. I gave a small, humble nod. "Your guidance was invaluable in solving the seemingly impossible riddle of the off-cycle date mechanism," Lena said, beaming at me. "A true masterstroke of horological problem-solving." "Indeed," I said, my voice amplified by the microphone, calm and clear. "A beautiful solution, but there is one final function you haven't demonstrated, the original travel time complication. If my memory serves, you must pull the crown to the third position and rotate it counterclockwise by exactly 3 full turns to engage the secondary time zone wheel. A simple but elegant test of the movement's fundamental integrity, is it not?" It was the trigger, the one specific, seemingly benign action that the fragile bridge I'd instructed her to build was not designed to withstand. Confusion flickered across her face, but she was trapped. The reclusive master whose genius she'd just publicly lauded had asked her to perform a simple function. To refuse would be admission of failure. Her ego would never allow it. "Of course," she said brightly, though I saw a slight tremor in her hand as she reached for the priceless watch. She lifted the Mariner, her movements projected 10 feet high on the screen, for the world to see in excruciating detail. She pulled the crown to the third position, began turning it counterclockwise. 1 turn, smooth. 2 turns, the secondary wheel engaged. On the 3rd turn, it happened. A sharp, sickening metallic ping echoed through the silent auditorium, amplified by the watch's sensitive microphone. On the massive screen, the entire audience watched in horrified slow motion as the beautiful, rhythmic dance of the watch's internal movement was utterly annihilated. The primary mainspring snapped like a gunshot. The recoil sent a shockwave through the gear train. The delicate ruby-set teeth of the escape wheel shattered into glittering fragments. The tourbillon cage buckled and seized. The heart of the St. Clair Mariner, which had beaten for over 150 years, was irrevocably, catastrophically, very publicly destroyed. A collective gasp. Lena stared at the dead, mangled object in her hands, her face a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. Her greatest triumph had turned to dust and broken metal in an instant, broadcast globally, immortalized forever. In the shocked silence, I walked onto the stage, took the microphone, calmly removed my spectacles, reached up, and with deliberate motion, peeled off the false gray beard. I looked directly into the broadcast camera. "My name is Arthur Vance," I said, my voice ringing with cold, hard clarity, "and I was Lena Petrova's mentor. She did not protect my legacy, she stole it. And just now, through her boundless arrogance and profound incompetence, she has destroyed it. But I had one final move." What she may not have known, I continued, as security personnel began moving toward the stage and a catatonic Lena, is that before I was illegally removed from my own company, I took out a significant multi-million-dollar insurance policy on the St. Clair Mariner. A policy that specifically ensured the integrity of its unique, historically documented ghost complication. I looked directly into the camera lens, speaking to the world. The destruction of that specific, named and insured feature on a live global feed constitutes what I believe will be a rather compelling case of felony insurance fraud. On top of everything else, the aftermath was glorious, righteous, perfectly executed. Lena was ruined, a pariah. Her name became a punchline, a cautionary tale. She faced lawsuits from the Mariner's owner, from the insurance company. Criminal investigation in Switzerland. Vance Co, now synonymous with the greatest horological disaster in modern history, was bankrupt within a month. I, on the other hand, was reborn. The story of the Ghost of Geneva became instant legend. The old master who'd been betrayed, the genius who'd use the secret knowledge of the craft itself to enact perfect, poetic, devastatingly public justice. I didn't want my old business back. Its name was tainted. Instead, something far better happened. Offers poured in from the world's top collectors, museums, the very people who'd witnessed the takedown. They didn't want to hire a company. They wanted to commission the man, the artist, the master who understood that a watch's true value isn't in its brand, but in its story, in its soul. I took the substantial insurance payout and lucrative commission fees and built a new workshop. A smaller, quieter, better place. A place founded not just on precision and craft, but on hard-won wisdom. The wisdom that comes from being completely broken down, having your life's work stolen and your heart shattered, and then having the courage, the skill, and the cold, patient rage to rebuild yourself. Piece by tiny, intricate, perfectly calibrated piece. In the end, she'd taught me something valuable. The most perfect revenge, like the most perfect watch, requires patience, precision, and the willingness to wait for exactly the right moment. And when that moment comes, you pull the crown to the third position and turn it exactly 3 times.